Hi, everybody. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. Me coming from AdAlliance, obviously, is a great pleasure to have you sit with us. For those who don't know, we come a long way. Our working relationship come a long way. We've been business partners for quite some time now, and it is by experience that I can say that not only is Lenovo a huge brand in terms of potential, both commercially and from a media perspective, but it's also the drive to media innovation that brought us here today, and obviously to discuss the topic of this session. And without further ado, Guy, how would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
My job title, Senior Strategy Manager, could cover anything really. I don't use it a lot. Basically, I'm part of a small team, a Media Centre of Excellence at Lenovo in EMEA. It's existed for 4 years. We sometimes refer to it as in-housing, but it's a bit more complicated than that. We still have conventional agency relationships, but we have a team within the EMEA marketing operation. It's only a team of 6 people. It's not huge by any means, but our job is just to help people do best in practice media in any way that we can. There are 2 people, me and one other person, who do media planning and strategy. And our role is kind of partly consultancy, I guess, to, people come to us with challenges, but also to try and drive the agenda and just drive better practice. So we do a bit of everything, really.
Thank you. So my first question today would be, in general, it's going to be, we're going to start simple, but I think it's also quite a long question to process. What is a brand like Lenovo looking to achieve? What are the general marketing challenges across Europe that you find?
So it's a really interesting brand. I mean, when I started working at Lenovo, my parents had never heard of Lenovo, and it's a huge, multinational corporation. It's absolutely massive, but we don't have the massive brand awareness that other brands have. One way that we do have awareness is probably like commercially. A lot of people's first experience of the brand is that they get a ThinkPad, they get a work laptop with the little red button on the top, and that's most people's first exposure. But beyond that, we also have sub-brands. We have a sub-brand strategy. So we have Legion, which is gaming laptops, which is really high spec, aimed at PC gamers. We have Yoga, which is more design-led, which is like a Windows laptop, but it's very high spec. It looks a lot like a Mac, and kind of in competition with Mac. We own Motorola brands, so that's everything from kind of more lower-end phones to like Motorola Razr, folding screens. We've got a huge range of products and a sub-brand strategy, but we don't really have big awareness. And what we're trying to do with our marketing is kind of move the brand forward, create that awareness and grow the brand, but also serve a lot of different needs. And it's even more complicated because a lot of our money comes from alliances. So, a lot of our advertising investment is co-funded with people like Intel or Microsoft, so everything that we do has to be really accountable. We kind of can't get away with just spending money for the sake of it or doing, elaborate things that don't have an end result.
I guess it makes perfect sense. And how would you link that back to the KPIs? What are the general KPIs that your marketing team is after?
It's really difficult. I mean, we've gone on a bit of a journey with KPIs over time. One thing that we've had to do internally, I think, is a bit of an education job about what a KPI is and what's a specific media KPI. We have to have things that go on media plans that are measurable, optimizable, things that we can actually look at, and that might be something, like a click-through rate or a view-through rate or something like that. That's a media KPI. Obviously, from a marketing point of view, that only tells us part of what we want to achieve. The briefing process that we've introduced now internally, we ask people to give us, the detail of what do they actually want to do from a marketing point of view, and then we help them to translate that into media KPIs. But the media KPI still has to be something that's very kind of, something that I can look at on a spreadsheet, basically, and that we can actually manage. And that is sometimes a challenge because not everything it lends itself to being measured in that way. It's an ongoing difficulty for us.
No, I understand completely. And since we touched on the KPIs, and the challenges that you continuously face towards them. Can you tell us a bit more about your media setup? Because it's quite an interesting one and complex to say the least, but also gives away the idea of or how much of a big brand Lenovo is.
The marketing setup. I mean, the number of people. There's I think within EMEA, there's not far off like 1,000 people in the marketing function in various markets, because there's, we have an EHQ level European headquarters, but then we also have like country level marketers. We have dedicated teams for particular projects, particular brands, etc. And the media team is like 6 people for the whole of Europe. So we have a different set of specialisms in there. We mostly work remotely. I mean, we're kind of based out of Milan, because most of us are based in Milan. Me and one other person work in London. One person works in Dublin. The group is, there's Italians, Poles, 2 French people. There's me. There's a mix, but we kind of bring
only one
expertise.
British.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Pierre's sort of British, but we have a real mix, and we're all from kind of agency backgrounds or vendor backgrounds in some cases, and we're trying to, I guess. We're acting as somebody who's there we're part of the marketing function. We report to the marketing director, but we're supposed to be a bit different. We're supposed to sit outside that and bring media expertise to it.
Interesting. And so it's quite a setup, to say the least. And how does this translate into your media implementation, looking at local nuances, I guess, versus the global?
We have to be really mindful. I mean, I've had to learn a lot, because my background was very much like UK. I'd done some international, but I'd mostly media planned in the UK on various brands. So we have different expertise. Some of us have more exposure to different markets, but generally what we have to do, I think, is we have to see where we can drive positive change by, doing things at a regional level, but also be awake to local nuance. So, there's lots of things that I've kind of learned along the way. I mean, like Germans don't use LinkedIn. I don't know if that's something. The French seem to love Snapchat. Like, you run Snapchat campaigns. French people love it. Don't know why. We find in some markets you can get away with things. Nordics, for example, you can do things in Nordics that are pretty aligned with what you do in the UK, and you don't have too many problems. Poland, if you don't run Polish specific things, people don't respond as well. There are some markets where you have to be really awake to the fact that there are particular local retailers, local vendors, etc. So there's a bit of learning, but then there's also kind of what we find generally is that if we keep it at a strategy level, if there are particular approaches, we can normally recreate that, even if we have to use slightly different vendors, slightly different, targeting to do it. So it's more quite often what we do as a team. We'll implement something in one market that works really well, and then we'll work out how we can use that in other markets. And if we can't, we can't. But if we can, we roll things out, we share that innovation and drive things forward.
Cool, interesting. Obviously, you touched on the complexity of Europe, obviously different countries, different media habits. You also touched on the nature of the business of Lenovo, which comes from different sub-brands all put in together. And looking at this complexity, how would you define your funnel strategy? Because
it's interesting. We can't, because we have this sub-brand strategy, and because realistically we don't have enormous budgets, if you try, and we've had this conversation with different agencies and in different strategy sessions over time, if you try and kind of map our competitors, it's not a very productive thing to do, because there are a lot of them, and a lot of them are very different businesses. With both Motorola and Lenovo, we're quite often in competition with Apple, for example. We're also in competition with HP and Dell because the business market and the kind of general consumer laptop market. In gaming, we're in competition with loads of brands that are in that space, and then mobile, because with Motorola we have everything from like Razer down. We're in competition with every mobile manufacturer. So if you start mapping out who we're competing with, there is almost no point, because there is no way that we can have a strategy to compete with all of those people in one go, and a lot of them spend far more money than us. So in terms of the funnel, I think everybody recognises that there's a bigger thing that we could do in terms of master brand. Lenovo as a whole, we've started to do some of that at the top of the funnel through things like the Formula One sponsorship. We're a Formula One partner now in the last couple of years, and that gives us an interesting way to talk about Lenovo. That's going to engage with people, both commercial audiences and consumer audiences. But we also need to do something on the sub-brands, so things like Yoga and Legion, that's a bit harder. Partly because the audiences are hard to talk to, like gamers are hard to talk to. If you go and target somebody, a group like PC gamers, and you tell them, hey, we're a brand for you, their instant reaction is to push back, and it's hard to be credible in that space. Yoga is kind of hard to explain to people because it's high spec, it's design, it's more about creating a kind of connection with the right kind of audience, and that's quite hard to do. And I think bringing it back to what you said about funnel, what we've done maybe is that we've realized over time that we don't have the money to do a real top funnel strategy for everything. We can't go out and run huge awareness campaigns over long periods of time for all of our sub-brands. We could go to the other extreme. We could spend all of our money at the bottom of the funnel, and it would be quite easy for us to put all of our money into things like Google search and retailers, to spend all of our money on, Amazon, Currys in the UK and other retailers, maybe put a bit of money into social media to put promotions and then do nothing else. But if we did that, the brand would completely stagnate. We wouldn't move forward. We wouldn't change market share over time. What we've kind of started to do a lot more, I think, is focus in what I'd call like the mid-funnel. So we're not trying to create a mass brand necessarily. We're not expecting to see, that by the end of this year, 10% more people will be aware of Lenovo. What we're trying to make sure is that people who may already have some affinity with the brand, may already be in the mid-funnel and are kind of a little bit aware of us, might fit we might fit their needs quite well, that we can change perceptions with those people. So over time, what we've been doing, a lot more campaigns that we're running have KPIs that are around kind of perception change and around shifts in consideration and preference among specific groups, rather than kind of trying to move the brands forward in like big steps, because that's not an effective strategy for us.
Yeah. Interesting take for sure. And in relation to this, in relation to the KPIs that you just mentioned, how do you think, and do you think connected TV is so popular because it sort of creates this perfect link between the upper funnel of TV and the benefits that comes with it, alongside the strengths of the lower funnel and digital? So how would you?
Yeah, I think it's starting to be able to do that. I'm a big fan of TV as a medium generally. In the past I've worked on a lot of like FMCG brands where I've run a lot of big linear TV campaigns, and I still believe that that's a really effective channel. But I think for somebody like Lenovo, it's hard for us to justify that. It's hard because our audiences are so specific for us to justify the wastage that we get with things like that. When we can go into something like connected TV and we can be very selective about audiences, obviously that makes TV campaigns much more in reach for us, and it means that we can run engaging AV ads that are going to change perceptions, but we can do it without having to spend as much money. In the past, I think the challenge with a lot of connected TV was that it didn't live up to the promise. Mm-hmm. To be honest, I think, because I remember 10 years ago having conversations in this space, and you'd find quite often that people would say, well, we can be really data targeted and we can deliver this thing for you. But you'd find that actually the data wasn't always that good, and it was going to cost you, like the cost per thousand was going to be 5-6 times what you might pay with linear TV. And it often didn't work out as worth it. I think where we are now is that that's changed a lot. The data is much more clear and transparent, we've found. We know what we're buying, and also the cost per thousand is not kind of dramatically over the top. So it makes sense to us from a financial point of view and an accountability point of view to do it. The other side of it as well, in terms of what it achieves and linking the upper funnel to the bottom funnel, is that within CTV we can do things like not only select an audience, but we can advertise to those audience at various points. So we haven't yet, but we could run sequential messaging, for example. Or we could run, and we have done this, we can run TV ads to them, but then we can also target them later on with display. So we know people have been exposed to our TV ad, but we can also run display activity and drive click-throughs from that. So it links the two together, and it generally just makes it more effective, more targeted, which works really well for our strategies.
And works for us too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it's a double win for sure. Yeah. And I think the next question comes quite natural. Obviously, Lenovo has been an early adapter of addressable TV in Germany, in the German market. And what do you think were the main drivers that pushed your team to choose addressable over linear?
Good question. So Germany, I mean, I talked earlier about accountability is a big thing for us. I think that's especially strong in Germany. Um, I, I think, it's a big market and it's a very important market for us, but I think the marketing teams in Germany and the expectation in Germany is that we will be very careful about what we deliver and we will be very accountable with the money. Being able to do something like connected TV where we could tell people exactly who we were going to reach, exactly the right audiences, rather than looking like we were spending a lot of money on a campaign that was going to have a lot of wastage, was the only way that I think we could have got something like a TV campaign over the line. I don't think we would have been able to do something without having that level of granularity. And then, getting the proof of the pudding afterwards, being able to, there's a few ways. I mean, I talked about measurability in terms of like being able to do the retargeting and seeing click-throughs. That's really important. Also, things like brand lift studies. And brand lift studies are a funny one. I sometimes in my media role, I talk to marketers about brand lift studies, and they say, oh well, obviously it's going to say that everything was good, to some extent. But brand lift studies, whilst they're in the media owner's interest to do, if they're accountable and if they're granular enough that they tell us some detail, they can still be really valuable. One of the things that we've seen with brand lift studies that we do now, when we work with the vendor to set the questions, we're not just seeing like, oh, we got a little bit of an uplift in awareness. We're seeing things like perception change. So we can ask questions about, is Lenovo Yoga a brand for creative people? Is Legion a gaming brand, etc. We can start to see some actual shift in the right metrics. It makes it a little bit more valuable, and ultimately it allows us to go back and show, the alliance partners and the marketers that what we've done was reaching the right people and having some impact. So it all helps.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I remember from our recent campaign we did in Germany, which was back in December. The perception of yoga was quite funny because obviously you've worked all the way. Your team has worked all the way up to the position yoga as one of the most premium brand, but yet there's still work to do in that respect. And the brand lift study is obviously a perfect example of how these things can be measured, I suppose.
Yeah. It's still, going back to what I said at the very beginning, the problem for us is still a lot of the time like that our brands don't mean anything. Anything that shows us that we can help to change that and that we can help to cut through to some people and shift that perception is really valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And finally, the last question I had was getting back to the media setup that we mentioned before and the complexity of it. The current complexity of it. What would be your dream setup for your future European campaigns, and how would that evolve into?
I think one of the big challenges for us is because we've got this complexity across markets and we've got so many campaigns. We kind of can't just plan on a campaign by campaign basis. We get really lost if we wait for a brief to land and then decide what we're going to do. We're in a constant kind of like rotation of just trying to get briefs out, trying to do things, not really thinking about it. I think what we're trying to move towards, especially for the sub-brand level, is having like a really clear framework of what we want to do, the channels that we want to be in, how we reach the audiences. With something like connected TV, what that's about is ahead of time, ahead of having a campaign, building the right ways to reach our audiences, building, we have audience strategy decks for all of our key sub-brands, so we know exactly who we're going to reach. We will then work with key vendors. I know you've seen these documents in the past. We'll work with key vendors and we'll build an audience and have that in place so that when I get a campaign brief, I can quite easily go, okay, it would be valuable to have, some connected TV in this. I already know exactly how I can reach the right people in these markets. I know roughly how much I need to spend in order to deliver that. I know that I can retarget those people and I can do this. I know that if I can get somebody to make different messages, I can feed that in, and then we're kind of ready to implement. I think that's one side of it, is almost having campaigns on tap that we know are going to reach the right people and that we can activate quickly. The other side of it and the other end of it is the measurement. I think, that when we've run campaigns in the past, sometimes it's not very easy for us to explain to partners and to marketers internally exactly what that's delivered. We can do things like delivery reports. We can do post-campaign analyses, and we can say we spent all the money and we reached, we delivered this many impacts and we delivered a certain number of clicks, but even that doesn't really tell a story. I think when we have richer measurement and we can show, well, we reached people with a campaign, but then we also reached them with subsequent messaging, We can show maybe how click-throughs and engagement rates differed between those different elements of the campaign. We can show a brand lift study afterwards and how that changed things. That's a much better story for us to be able to tell. And when we're talking to people like, you know, Intel and AMD and stuff and asking for money, or when we're making a case internally for investment and saying that we need more money to shift brand perception, that's a better story for us to be able to tell. So sorry, to summarize, I want to be able to do things on tap without having to start from scratch every time and just be able to activate campaigns that we already know are going to work. And I want to be able to build a much better story about how that's working and proof of the value of that to people internally and externally.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And if I've still got, JB, do I have time for one last? Or yeah. How would you envision your relationship with broadcasters in the coming future? How would you like it to, if you could shape it in a way you could in your future media setup?
One of the, oh God, it's a really good question. One of the things that we found, I'm going to be quite open here, I think. When we first started out, one of the first things that we did, because we were the media team and we were trying to add value as a media team, is that we had lots of conversations with vendors. And then we kind of found that a lot of the conversations that we were having with vendors weren't very productive, to be honest, because a lot of the time, you know, because we're media specialists anyway, we kind of knew most of what they were telling us. We were getting generic stuff back and it wasn't leading anywhere. So I think one of the realizations that we had as a team early on was that we had to give a lot more to those conversations. You know, there was no point us just going, oh, do you want to come in and talk to us for half an hour? We had to kind of have a longer term relationship, tell you what we were trying to do, brief people, share data where we could and try and build something. So that's what we've been doing a lot more. You know, I think the relationship that we need to have with not with everyone, but with vendors that we work with regularly is a bit like what I described before as an ongoing thing. We need to tell you now that next year we're thinking about these campaigns, these audiences, what can we do, what can we build, what can we create? Because otherwise, by the time we come to do it, there's no time. We end up with like off-the-shelf media solutions. It's much better for us that we're having these long-term conversations. And also because, as I said, there's 6 of us in the media team, it kind of means that you guys can do a lot of the heavy lifting and come back to us with stuff rather than us having to develop all of the strategy ourselves, you know. So I think that's a big part of it, is like having conversations with vendors, but having the right conversations at the right time and giving people long enough. And, you know, the other thing about the way we work, I mean, as I said earlier, it's not like, we sometimes talk about it as in-housing, it's not necessarily fully in-housing. So I'm a media person who sits within Lenovo, but we still have agencies, you know, so I can kind of ideally afford to have some of those conversations. You know, we don't have to worry about things like agency deals and things like that. We can just have sometimes those quite open conversations. And if it comes to nothing, it comes to nothing, but at least we get a better understanding of what we could do with different vendors. So that's, yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good answer.
Now, I think we still have some time for some questions from the audience. If anyone would like to kick off, any questions?
It's a good question. There's loads that we could do, and we've talked about various different routes. First party is a bit hard because we can't use a lot of that data necessarily. But what we have done, like for yoga with the German campaign that we were talking about, with yoga, the people that we're trying to target generally are people who would buy like a laptop that's going to cost £1,500 to £2,000, and they're going to buy it because of the spec, but also because it looks really nice. And that's a particular subset of people. So, you know, what we targeted were people who had interests in kind of design, people who were creators, people who were tech early adopters, you know, which we could do, I think, partly through the interest data that you guys have, but also through viewing data. So knowing what programs they'd watched previously, you know, in the months beforehand on German TV, for example, we could say, this is somebody who cares about, you know, design and premium products. Yeah, I mean, we're open to more. The one interesting thing that you said about the first-party data, that's a challenge for us still. That's something that maybe we can do more of in future, but so far, not so much. It's more about interests.
Thank you, JB. Anyone else from the audience?
It's interesting. We do quite a lot of modelling on these kind of questions, and we've started doing that as an exercise of like, partly to try and make it real when we have those conversations for people internally. So what we quite often do is look at, you know, a few different budget scenarios. That's a kind of what we think we're going to have. 75% of what we think we're going to have, 1.5 times what we think we're going to have. But the interesting thing is it doesn't always make that much difference, I think, in terms of channels. I think probably what I would say is that we wouldn't spend any more at the bottom of the funnel. We're actually trying to pull back the amount that we're spending with retailers and with Google and people like that, because we're already potentially quite saturated. What we'd probably do if we had more money is try and do a bit more, just give a bit more weight to the things that we know are working. So those mid-funnel campaigns, things like connected TV, yes, but also we've run some really nice campaigns, especially around gaming. We've run some really nice campaigns with like custom creative, larger format display, doing things that are, right fit for context, that have often worked really well, but we haven't been able to put huge budgets behind that. So we'd probably just look at not doing anything that we're not doing now, but doing more of the things that we think work really well for us. Yeah. If we had like a lot more money, yeah, that would change things. I mean, because there's things like when we look at Apple, and I mentioned Apple earlier, but I used to do media planning for like Huawei at one point as well, and when you look at Apple, it's never really a productive conversation because I've been asked, people have said before, like, how do we make our marketing strategy more like Apple? And the answer is that you spend an enormous amount more money and you do it for like 10 years consistently, and you don't care about cost, and it's just there's no point talking about it because it's never going to happen. So we still have those conversations, but we don't hold out hope. Yeah.
Cool. Do we still have time? Few questions. One more question, if there's one. Is there any? Maybe I can ask myself another one. How would you position Motorola in this, the level of growth and how difficult the market is?
Motorola is really challenging because there's different perceptions of Motorola as well. Like, I think those of us who were like old enough to remember sort of 20 years ago, Motorola was like a really cool brand, when the original Razr was launched and stuff. And there's still some of that heritage, but really we have a huge range of products. The people who buy Motorola at the moment is a really mixed bunch. Some of it is people who are kind of tech conscious but budget conscious. So they're actually the people who are like looking at specs and really want to buy a good handset that's a really good in-market volume. They're going in with a price in mind and looking at specs. And obviously we'll take those people, that's great. Some of it is people who are buying things like Razrs and want the really high-tech stuff, the really high-end stuff, and that's brilliant too, and we want them. Some of it actually, and we can't quite always work out, you get these weird little segments sometimes where you can identify that these people are coming in and buying it. But anyway, the key point is at the moment there's a load of disparate groups who are buying Motorola, and there's not necessarily like a joint overall direction for the brand. I think the challenge for us is that for us to create something, we'd probably need to spend quite a lot more money than we do now, and that's maybe something that we'd like to do in the future and create more of a Motorola identity. At the moment, because we have so many different products, really what we're doing with Motorola is very tactical, a lot of it. But it's a sleeping giant, like it has huge potential, and the handsets are really good.
So in terms of funnel, we're laying at the very low still for Motorola,
yes.
climbing up the funnel slowly but surely.
We've done some cool stuff. I mean, we've done some stuff as well with like sports in Germany, sports sponsorships and things like that. One of the nice things, having like a bunch of sub-brands and doing things across EMEA is really complicated, but one of the benefits is that we get to try lots of different things. So one of the things interestingly with like Formula One, which is a huge thing and a worldwide thing, part of the reason that I think we were willing to go for something like Formula One was that we'd had a long-standing relationship with MotoGP in Italy, which is big in Italy. It's not big outside of Italy so much, and people don't see it as much, but MotoGP had worked really well for Lenovo in Italy, and therefore you do something like that, it can lead to you doing something much bigger with like Formula One worldwide. So that's nice. We've always got different things going on and different little projects that we're trying.
Yeah, and you follow different sports. Like with Motorola, basketball is also another one. Is another one to look at. Also the NBA, Chicago, right? Is sponsored by Motorola. So yeah, few different sponsorship angles to look at for sure. Well, thank you for the session, Guy. Very insightful, and thank you, audience.